Manufacturer has a different system on attaching these splash guards to the bottom of the car, and every single one of them is a big pile of poo. Thanks for joining the channel, Scott's Garage HTX. Don't forget the HTX. Today it's all going to be about the tools that we use to do our oil changes here at the business. We'll start with the skid plates and splash guards, oil filters, and then drain plugs. Now, there is a difference between splash guards and skid plates. Skid plates are mainly on trucks. They protect the undercarriage of the vehicle from rocks and off-road terrain. Splash guards are usually a splendid piece of plastic or even felt I've seen on some cars that they actually do have a purpose, or they want to put them on there. They direct air from the front of the engine to the back of the engine. Instead of letting it going down to the road, it actually directs the airflow towards the back for cooling purposes, and it keeps the engine clean. Why do you need to keep the engine clean? Well, a dirty engine runs hotter than a clean engine. To begin with, splash guards attach to the bottom of these cars in many ways. Every manufacturer has a different system on attaching these splash guards to the bottom of the car, and every single one of them is a big pile of poo. Not one manufacturer does it right. Whatever would be right, but every single system they have is a big pile of crap. I'll start with, and I'm not want to pick on any manufacturer, quite honestly, but I'll start with, say this is a Honda fastener to the splash guards underneath the Honda. It's a metal little aluminum fastener, and it attaches to the bottom of the car. The splash guard goes here, and then the undercarriage of the car is here. What is the undercarriage of the car I'm talking about? A thin piece of plastic. What happens to plastic when you rub metal against it over and over again to get it off and on? Well, it deteriorates. Big pile of crap. There are other systems here that have, this one I believe is off a Volkswagen product. It doesn't matter if it's an Audi or a Volkswagen or any other product, but you can see that this screw looks basically like a sheet metal screw. And a lot of times they go into this little rubber grommet right here that attaches to little holes on the undercarriage of the vehicle. What happens to rubber after it is used over and over again to take on and off these splash guards? And if you over tighten it and screw it too tight or strip it, well, it deteriorates. Big pile of crap. Then you have some that are just way off the line. Little plastic filters or plugs, these things that we see on interior pieces and so forth. What happens to these plastics as they go through many heat cycles and through the environment? Well, they start to deteriorate, and they're not well made to begin with. Anyway, what do? Well, they start to deteriorate. Big pile of crap. They do have some that have metal or bolt fasteners to them. Here's an example of one that goes through maybe a clip and the fastener itself. This might be Audi product. I don't know. I don't remember off of this one offhand. These clips don't stay on the undercarriage very well. Eventually they start to strip out. We do have some clips that are a little bit more robust, and this, that little raised portion there is where the screw would go through, or the bolt would go through actually. These are a little bit more hardy, but still they don't last forever, and they fall off the car or they get stripped. Once again, big pile of crap. Skid plates are a little bit more robust. They can go on by a clip, usually a much more hardy clip onto the undercarriage of the car, or they'll actually tack weld bolts underneath, or nuts screwed, pre-tapped, that the nut can go through on the undercarriage of the car, and that's the most ideal. But they're usually, because they're designed to protect the undercarriage of the car, they do a little better job of fastening up. Now, there are many different methods to get these fasteners from the skid plates and splash guards off quickly to help us with the oil changes. One of the best ways is a little mini impact wrench. And what I like about these, some of these attach by, just bolts, some of them attached by Torx, others by screwdrivers. But what I like about this is that any attachment can go onto this little mini impact wrench. What I also like about this is the impact wrenches that we use have a selectable torque rating on it, from 1 to 2 to 3 to, I guess, 4 nuclear. I always set mine on 1 as to avoid stripping the components I just had mentioned. You go up to the nuclear part and you can see how you can run into some problems. Let's talk about filters. Canister filters. or spin-on filters. We've seen these before, and they're very simple, kind of older technology, but very, very reliable. Take it off, lubricate the seal on the new filter, spin it on. We have all kinds of tools that attach to the filter to help them get secure on the filter sealant or the filter face, and we can use ratchets and stuff like that to take them on or off. Now, canister filters are a little bit different. Each manufacturer may have a different way or a different system to house these filters. They usually go into some part of a receptacle underneath the car or even on top of the car with a plastic cap that goes on top of it. Sometimes this plastic cap can be removed by a similar tool that we remove the spin-on filters with. This is a good example. This is for a BMW, and this one's quite sturdy. It's very thick and very robust. I like this. There are other times that we have to use large sockets to get the filter housings off, or in other cases, specialty tools like this tool right here for Volvo. This is for a Volvo, and then there are ones for Toyota. Now, I'm going to pick on Toyota a little bit because they started a system back in 2008, 2009, somewhere around there, where they had a plastic housing for their canister filters, and it's notoriously poo, basically, because it's a plastic housing. Again, what happens to plastic as it goes through thousands and thousands of heat cycles from 220 degrees down to maybe 30 degrees, whatever part of the country you live in? Well, it starts to get brittle. These housings, I'll tell you right now, these are the metal ones. I get metal housings of replacements because when the plastic housings come in that are damaged or break, we replace it with a metal housing so that problem doesn't happen anymore. But let me show you what the issue is on these housings. Imagine if this was plastic. It looks the same in metal or not, right? Except for on one side of this housing right here, the plastics one has 3 tabs. See the little tab right here? There's 1, 2, 3. And then there's one on the other side. And a tool goes into that. And what you want to make sure happen is, see how they have many faces around the side of this filter housing? Well, when you look at the tool, that has many faces on it too. So there's 2 points of contact on these filters. You want to make sure that you've put the metal or the middle key right here onto the filter itself, like so. If you get it off a little bit and it's not on the middle one, it doesn't grab. It only gets to this little pop portion of the metal key, and that's when they start to break. And sometimes just a little bit of it just nicks off, but sometimes when you take it off like that, the whole key right here comes off, this whole tab, and it's a hole. What is the big problem with this stuff? Well, when it comes from, and I'm not going to pick on other shops, but we don't do this. When it comes from other places, sometimes they forget to lubricate the seal that's all around here. And when you do that, it really makes it tight. This is not a torqued item. This is a positive stop item. When it stops, it's on, right? There's no torquing it per se. So when you put this on and you don't have a dry seal up there, this can kind of get very, very tight. And sometimes we've even tried to take a look at this breaker bar. I've tried to use this breaker bar sometimes to get those filter housings off, and I can't do it. And when I run into those problems, I usually send them back to where they came from, because here's my logic. If I break that filter housing, I'm going to charge you the hours and hours of labor it takes to chisel that filter housing out of that receptacle. But if you go back to the place you went to, it's really their problem. They're the one that did the service last, and they're responsible for their work. That's what we do. Anyway, so get back to the placement of this tool. Make sure it's in the middle. That way it's grabbing these teeth on either side, and it's grabbing the face of this part of the filter housing, and you should not have any problem. Then when you put it back together, lubricate this seal, put it back up there. When it stops, it stops. There's not much torque to that. One thing I'll notice or mention about these tools, this tool is very, very robust. They make cheap ones out there that are like this. See how thin those walls are on this tool? What happens is when you have to remove this filter housing, these tabs, like this one has already started to do, you can see it's starting to bend. They start to bend, and this tool is actually useless. Get something that has some meat to it. Look how thick. Look at the difference between these two. I just lost my battery. Hold on one sec. Okay, I'm back. Notice the difference between these two. One, the robustness and thickness of this tool. This is not going to fail on you. This one is. Another thing I'll mention, we do remove these. These can be difficult to remove, the little rubber O-rings. Just get a nice little tool like this, and you can dig inside there and get that rubber O-ring out and replace it with a new one. Drain plugs. Stripping a drain plug thread is not that big of a deal. You just replace the bolt itself. Stripping the threads on an oil pan, well, that's another story, and we avoid that at all cost. Some drain plugs are like this, a little hex bolt. This is a 14 millimeter. Other ones attached with Torx tools like this. They basically do the same job. Some bolts are just bolts themselves and don't have a felt or a rubber gasket or any gasket in between, while others will either have a crush washer or a brass washer in between them. We have all of those washers mainly in stock, and if I have run into one that's a little odd, I do have a little tool here where I can measure the original washer itself inside and out, call my distributor and start getting those washers itself, because, you know, sometimes manufacturers change their methods and their bolt sizes over time. Now, stripping the hex portion or the Torx portion of the bolt is another story, right? So here we use different tools to make sure that doesn't happen. They come in sometimes, then they are already stripped. They'll be rounded off. And then we have ways of getting those off. You can use a tool like this portion right here that has bites inside the socket itself, and you get the right size. This one is for a 14 millimeter or 9/16 bolt, and it goes onto the rounded portion of the bolt, and you can get them off that way because it bites into the metal itself. Then it's stuck on there. Use this little tool here to push it out. What I do to prevent rounding off bolts is have the right wrench to begin with. I use a 6-point wrench on my lower bay activities. That way, and if you look at this wrench, you'll see that it's beveled on the middle in between the points. So when you put the bolt on to the wrench or the wrench onto the bolt, it's grabbing the middle of the flat portion of the bolt, and that's where all the torque is, not on the points of the bolt itself. In contrast, a 12 point, and it has 12 points have their purpose, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. They have 2 points on each of the face of the bolt, and they grab mostly on the points of the bolt themselves, and they can get rounded off over time or if they're too tight. The spline type wrenches are the same way, it's just a different style, but there are still 2 splines per face of the bolt itself. Now these have their purpose, right? Because if you're in a tight spot, 12 points work great. If you just can only work it a certain amount at this end of the bolt, like you only have an inch or 2 on the side of the bolt, they're great because you don't have to move them a full 6 point like this. So you have a tighter range to get into the bolts. We don't have to worry about that when we're underneath the car and get into the drain plugs. Manufacturers are actually inventing ways or coming up with ways to combat the stripping of their pans and their bolts. And at first, I didn't like the concept, and then I started to realize over time that it works a little better, because if something fails, and I'll give you an example. This is a Ford. Usually we see them on the trucks, and it's a plastic drain plug with a rubber O-ring in there, and quite honestly, even the drain plug or the pan itself is plastic. But what fails, if anything fails or anything strips, it's almost always this plug, and you just replace the plug. So we have spare plugs. Here's a European version of that. And what happens is when something fails, it's usually just that rubber O-ring right there, and we can just replace that. That actually, like I said before, Didn't like this at first, and now I really see the benefit of it, but they do fail. They're not lifetime. You can get a bolt to last a lifetime in your car as long as you just don't over torque it. These kind of degrade over time and you have to get them replaced, but they're very cheap to replace. And it seems, I'm coming around that it's probably a better system. I'm going to touch on one more thing about tools before I go. One of my previous episodes, I had returned a part or a tool that failed for Craftsman, and it was a relatively simple process. I filmed it and they replaced the tool. I tried that a second time. I had a ratchet that failed, and the ratchet part number was this. I went in there and said, I need a new ratchet. Well, they did not have this exact part number, and the guy in the tool department said, sorry, no dice, it has to be the exact part number. I was a little frustrated with that, but that's okay. They do have a phone number to call, and I was actually I was dreading this, but it was really, really freaking simple. I called the phone number that they had to replace the part. I told them the part number. I did not have to send it in, and they sent me back a tool that was not the same part number that this guy argued he had to do at Lowe's. I think they sent me a better tool. So if you run into this problem where one of your ratchets failed, and this happens to be the part number again, try that phone number, because I think I got a better tool. It still has the plastic little switch between on and off that probably will break over time. But two things I noticed: it feels better in the hand, it's chrome plated so you can keep it cleaner, and when I tested out the mechanism here with the ratcheting system, there's much more clicks in between these clicks right on this tool. So the advantage of that is again, tight spaces. When you have only 12 clicks in between ratcheting in a full circle between 24 or 36, you can work in tighter spaces. So I think they sent me a better tool. What do you know? You guys keep on keeping on. We'll catch you next time. Later.